I would like to thank you, Cynthia, for being here today. And Alfredo, we were talking here a little bit before to open the section. And I'm very glad to be here as the chair of the section. And I think that both of you have like something around 15 minutes to present the work, and then we open for questions and discussions and things like this, right? So Cynthia, I was thinking that we could start with you. Is that okay for you?
Sure. Let me just share my screen.
Yes, check if you need something.
Let me just download my presentation because I have it on Google Drive, but I don't have the option here to share from the drive.
Oh, no problem.
So let me just download it. It will be just a second. Okay, so can you see my presentation?
That's perfect.
Perfect. So basically what I'm going to be talking about is how we use alternate history to teach business consulting. I'm going to be relating to the experience that we had last year because we had the first What If workshop here at UPAEP. And this year we just had the second one. And this is becoming really interesting for students. Students are really looking forward to this because it's like looking at a different perspective on how you can take on things that come from literature or film and introduce them into business consulting. So just as a previous background, we started working with the What If since 2021. We had different articles and participations along the way. And UPAEP is a private university in Puebla, in Mexico City, near Mexico City. And at the business school, consulting has been a mandatory course. It means that all the programs from the business school need to take this course. And we use traditional business practices, traditional tools for consulting. And we haven't really gone into different areas such as arts. So by introducing this type of perspectives of the alternative history, this has created quite a new perspective, and businesses are really interested because they're looking at their own things from a lot of different angles. And this creates this multi-perspective learning and also promotes critical thinking among students because there's a lot of value when you ask what if. It's about thinking of all the possibilities of what might happen and what might change when something happens. And what's interesting even is that right now, a lot of people are thinking about what if in different forms with relation to consulting. For example, what if management consultants are not as vital to success of the business? And this was something that was published by the Financial Times in 2018. So even we're thinking, what if consulting is not the way to go in business? And if we think about what consulting practices are, basically they come from the word auditor or auditor, which comes from the Latin audire, which means to listen. So what we're doing is listening to the stories that people are talking about and understanding those stories. And now by introducing these techniques, what we're doing is changing those stories into histories of the business. And this way we can identify obstacles that companies face when they're trying to reach their goals. And if you look at basic definitions of consulting, it's kind of a process that helps transfer expertise and knowledge and even skills from one party to another. Normally, you would say that it comes from the consultant to the client, but it goes both ways. Because you as a consultant always also learn a lot from the client and you create these stories together. And this part of storytelling has also been growing a lot in consulting. We're seeing that a lot of interest has gone into storytelling because every person has a story to tell. And us as human beings, we are connected through stories and histories. And storytelling can be very helpful when you want to deliver clear and memorable messages. This is easier for people to remember when you tell a story than when you use a tool and tell them about the results from the use of that tool. It also helps create this shared point of view. People remember things better and create more interest when you're talking in stories. And also, if you think about storytelling, it's used everywhere, even in merchandising and marketing and public relations. It helps represent ideas, products, companies, causes, etc. It even helps sell better. But here we're going to use it specifically for consulting. And when we introduce the idea of alternate history in consulting, we start with the basic question, what if? Which is one of the most important questions that we can ask as human beings. It's part of our existential life. No? What if something didn't happen that way? What if we can change something? And when we use alternate history in the consulting courses, also what we're helping is students learn from history because they have to analyze history in full, especially if we're talking about the history of a company, so that they can change it. So it's kind of a double learning because they're analyzing in detail whatever happened with a company. And it also introduces a new window on how we understand the past, especially when we're talking about businesses. Sometimes we don't look that much at the past. We want to introduce change and see it in the future, but we can learn from what happened in the past and what we can change if we were able to go back in the past so that we could have a different result today. So this what if creates these invisible stories that people don't necessarily create or ask. And we create an interactive past that can be modified because it's modified as a history. So we can go back and change it and see what results we might have. So in essence, it can be like modeling or also like using simulation, but we're doing it with literature. And also, when analyzing the history of businesses, we can think about substituting the course of events. What if we change something specific? What if something in the context was different? What if we had a different tool or a different machine? What if we had different people working with us? What if we were a transnational company? What if instead of being a partner with a French company, we're a partner with a Chinese company, etc.? And Nicolas Taleb says that when we think about different alternatives in history, it's like having a Russian roulette. You can have 5 enriching histories and 1 statistic. And it's quite possible that students nail it, that they find the right thing that needed to be changed. And also what we need to understand is that history does not always prepare us for the future, but stories do. Because histories we cannot change, but we can create new stories about how we want things to develop in the future. And also Nicolas Taleb says that doing this, when we play with alternate histories and also with storytelling, it's like playing with black swans. And he refers to black swans as these events that people think never occur, but that they're more common than we actually think. And this helps students rethink and rebuild businesses together. Normally, when we take the consulting courses, they're working directly with a specific business. And so the workshop that we had last year, we had the first one. It was called the First International Workshop of Hypothesis Management and Economics. It was held here at UPAEP. We have different campuses. It was held at the central campus. It happened on November 22nd. It lasted for 3 hours, and we had 23 students from 6 different programs. So we have students from management, business analytics, we have students from finances, from logistics, from hospitality, even from gastronomy, because that's also inside our business school. And it went so well that people started talking about what they did. And we had to develop additional workshops outside of the Hypothesis Alternativa workshop, because not just all other students, but also faculty started to become interested in using these techniques. And the main strategies that we have while we did the workshop is we worked in small groups. So depending on the number of students that were there were groups of 2 or 3 students. We presented the general introduction to alternate history, some of the important aspects of how to deal with it. They also understood about how the methodology worked, and we did that through examples from films and literature. We show a different kinds of series that are still on that deal specifically with alternate history. And we also analyzed or explored historical turning points in businesses. So the businesses that they were working with, they had to analyze the history and find specific moments in time in which if something happened differently, the result would be completely another thing. And we used these alternative histories for 4 different things. It was specifically to promote organizational change, to use it as part of scenario planning and establish different alternatives of what might happen in the future. For business process re-engineering, but thinking about the past, what we can change in the past to see a different future. And also we use it for benchmarking. And those were basically what we worked with. And the students developed their own stories and the new histories for the alternative histories. And we also use what's called business archaeology, which is basically to go back in the history of a business and even find artifacts or specific people who were maybe agents in something happening, or maybe a specific space, maybe a hall or the factory floor, or maybe a machine, something that could give us an idea of what happened. And if we change that specific artifact, something will change. And we analyze also facts and fiction when they wrote the histories. We found what we call keepers, which were these specific elements that are the ones that are going to change the story completely. They did risk assessment when they're creating these alternative histories. They worked using the idea of time travel to fix problem. What if you could only go back 3 times? Which moments in time would you go back to? What would you change? And they did also the idea of precognition, of thinking that they might have these divination properties or abilities to plan what the future might look like. And also when they created these histories and maybe they didn't work, they could do a complete do-over. That was the good thing. It's like you can always do over with alternate histories. And there were a lot of insights and projects developed. Students were really interested. They were more engaged than when we had used traditional methodologies and tools such as SWOT analysis, for instance, and other tools for consulting. And they created some of the most interesting stories that they created was this one. There was a group that worked on debunking Michael Porter. And they said, what if the 5 forces were wrong? And they developed alternative forces. And they said, well, if this happened under these conditions, you can prove that Porter was wrong. They also created another one that was not so SWOT. So they changed what SWOT meant, what SWOT, the acronym means, that was strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and I just forgot the last one. Threats, I'm sorry. And they changed it completely to just positive perspectives of the future. So that was really interesting. They also did one that was called the best Coca-Cola climate. They analyzed Coca-Cola in a moment in which the internal climate was not very good, and they analyzed and changing it using the idea of the advertising that Coca-Cola does for Christmas, in which everything is happy. So they use that to create the narrative for the climate inside Coca-Cola. And another one was, what if money never existed? Of course, there are others, but these were the ones that at the end, people voted for the histories that they liked the most. And these were the ones that people decided were the best. And this year, we also had a workshop. We had it yesterday. And we incorporated another set of alternatives. We used art, especially a technique called soul collage, in which students make a collage about this alternate history instead of writing the history, and then they explain what they did in the collage. And also we started incorporating artificial intelligence. So they started working with ChatGPT, asking ChatGPT to create the alternate history based on the information that they were given. And it was really, really interesting, the results. And now we added other things. For example, we also added reducing gender bias. That was about what if in the company that you were analyzing, all the people in certain positions were women instead of men. We also introduced risk assessment as a new methodology. And as I said, we included artificial intelligence as a way to understand business through alternate history. And we had very few students this time because we are in exam week, but another session is expected to happen next week. So we're still going to have other things coming through. So basically, this is what we did. And it has been really interesting. It's been thrilling even, and people are now talking about this type of events. So I'm sure that this is going to become something permanent for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It was really nice. I had some connections problems. Are you listening to me well? Yeah.
Yes.
I hope so. Yeah, that's perfect. So Cynthia, I'm going to ask Alfredo to present and then we talk. Is that okay? Like this
Perfect.
Dynamic? That's so good. So Alfredo, please.
I love taking part of it. Today I'm going to bring to you something which is not properly science, but it is a big question. Who killed Gina's mother? Because Gina was a young girl who was abused by her mother to the point that Gina decided to kill her. Yes, tough, of course. But because she was a minor, she was sentenced not to prison, but to some sort of reformatory. And being so bright, eventually she made it into Harvard and Yale. At least she got letters of acceptance. Only that an anonymous letter brought the news to Harvard and Yale and others that Gina had in fact killed her mother. Those letters of admission were rescinded, and Gina had a different life than what could have been. The big question is, how responsible was Gina for killing her mother? You know, for the last 500 years, we've believed that people are responsible for their acts and they should be punished for them if necessary. Over time, the locus of blame and concentration has been passed from the individual to society. But Dr. Sapolsky believed that really there's no such thing as free will, that we are a machine that is actually predetermined to behave in a certain way, and we really control very little of our behavior. Even if it were so, the fact was that in about the late 19th century, a prominent economist suggested that business cycles were influenced by weather. It wasn't easy to take his advice, but you see, he was speaking at a time where steam engines and coal were making an inroad, and then later oil and gas came up. So, you know, he was forgotten. We forgot that the sun was behind it all, even the fossil fuels. But now that we have global warming, we are becoming more interested in the sun, and the idea that perhaps behavior is influenced by the sun, even on human beings like on the rest of living organisms on the earth, is making a new inroad. So this is why we have suggested to bring space weather into the picture. Now, part of what we call space weather is the cycle of the sun measured in terms of sunspots. They have been recorded for millennia, and we have agreed that there is an 11-year cycle of sunspots, from very few sunspots to peak of them, and then they go down again. Now, those peaks come in different intensities, perhaps in sequences of 3, And we argue that they influence human behavior. Wow, why? Because you see, around those sunspots we have solar flares and other eruptions that throw into the space an enormous amount of energy, usually magnetically charged. And when they enter into action with our own Earth's magnetosphere, they provoke on the Earth things that we called geomagnetic disturbances. Now, they affect many living organisms on the Earth, and over zillions of years we have become accustomed to it, except that perhaps some people are more prone to be influenced by geomagnetic disturbances than others. How does this happen? We don't really know, but there is an idea that we have a sequence of hormonal dysfunctions that are triggered by the geomagnetic disturbances and eventually lead into aggression. So we are interested in human aggression, but we can't actually measure human aggression except through homicides. This is why we're interested in homicides, because there is a corpse. And we can see it. We're told when this person was killed, which day, at what time. So we can match that with geomagnetic disturbances. Usually criminologists have tackled the issue of homicides through the intention, the weapon, the circumstances, the place, and all those are important. But they focus only on the event. With my colleagues, we have decided to look further and see if that behavior is similar in one country and in another. And we've tracked the similarity of the homicides rates between the USA, England, and Germany. So there must be something that affects people all over the place. And what I'm showing to you now here is the sequence of the life event of Gina Grant until she was rescinded from Harvard and Yale. When she was born, it was far from a peak sun cycle, and she was too small to do anything about it. When the next peak, she was only 4 years old. But then her father died, and his elder sister left home, and Gina was left only with her mother, who became alcoholic and very abusive towards her. Eventually, Gina reacted and killed her mother with a candlestick, repeatedly hitting her on the head. She was, of course, sanctioned, but being so talented, she was eventually admitted at Harvard and Yale through letters of acceptance, until somebody, as I said, threw out the idea that Gina had actually killed her mother, and those letters were rescinded. Now, if we look at the evolution of solar cycles in the lower part of that graph, you see that the intensity of them has dropped over some time. We are now on the last one, which we call number 25. It's on the further right. But during that period, the homicide rates, as the intensity of the solar cycles, declined, perhaps to 1/2. So the question that I ask is, if Gina and her father and mother and sister had been born 2 decades later, when the peak of solar cycles was much smaller, and so was the rate of homicides, and therefore aggression, if she had been born later, could she still be blamed for her behavior? And this is what you see in this graph. 2 decades later, the rates of sunspots was much smaller, and perhaps also the level of aggression, and perhaps her mother would not have been so abusive, and Gina might not have killed her. And she may have been accepted at Harvard and Yale and led a completely different life from the one that she did. So the question is, why are we looking into aggressive behavior? Because, you know, we need to understand the wars and infights, even within corporations or families, if you wish. But there is a behavior of human aggression that we can't explain. And of course, it usually doesn't lead into killing another person, but it makes life quite uncomfortable. But we look into corpses because that is what we have. But you see, we're not just looking into the dark. We have found out that there is a great correlation between the killings of people in Canada and in the USA over time, these homicides rates have evolved in tandem. Despite the fact that in Canada, people kill each other much less than in the USA. In fact, in the USA, they kill 3 to 4 times as many people as per rate of population as they do in Canada. But what is surprising is that when homicides rates go up in the USA, they also go up in Canada, and vice versa. So there must be something that is affecting people in both countries in terms of their aggressive behavior that leads to homicides. Now, is it only homicides? No, perhaps this is also related to schizophrenic on-sites, to riots, to wars, and other forms of disequilibrium that we should be looking into. And so far, we've been looking essentially to just the events rather than what may trigger them from outside. If you don't believe me, look at this graph on the Second World War. 75 million people were killed. And the beginning of the war was at a time of peak solar cycle. And when we got to peace, that was a result of a lower level of sunspots. So it's not enough to prove anything. But if you look at the authorized executions that happen all over the world, and this data excludes China, where they kill a lot of people, you have to really to understand that there are peak number of authorized executions at the time of peak sunspots. Now, this is not just to play around with data, but to suggest that there may be something more that we have hitherto considered regarding what triggers aggression to the extent of homicides. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Cynthia, for the presentation. It was really nice. For me, it's really a pleasure to listen to you. It's my first time in this event, so it is really nice to see how you're dealing with alternate history, and you are analyzing like the learning process, and I think it's pretty interesting. One of my questions, actually, it was not actually a question, but it was like a curiosity. I come from the Arts Institute, and I was thinking about how it would be like to use the process that you were describing in the art, and exactly what you did like yesterday. So it's pretty nice. I had some notes here, so I would like to share with you my notes, and then of course we can talk a little bit. I don't know if you have questions for Alfredo as well, so we can have this moment. I don't think we have questions for outside, right? Like it's just like our interaction, I guess. So
yes,
I'm not
it's just
sure.
our interaction. But in the meantime, while Alfredo reconnects, let me just show you some of the things that they did yesterday.
Come on.
Okay, so these are basically collage. This is a technique called slow collage. And what is good about this is that you don't need to have any art skills. All you do is cut and paste, basically.
Exactly.
But what they did, for instance, I don't remember exactly because I don't have the narratives right here. But this was saying that in this company, this was like crossing through a ring of fire. That's how people felt. Because of excessive work, people were burned out. So they kind of explained the full thing just by this image that they created. And it's interesting because in collage, things happen kind of random. You don't really decide how it's going to look at the end. But then they use this to create the narrative of the alternative history of what they should do. So first they go through what we can call the worst scenario, and then they create the alternatives.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, and that's really nice. I would like to when you told me about the last experience you had with the business school, the economic school, I'm thinking I don't know if you agree, but talking about or bringing alternate history to them, like the storytelling process, etc., is like I see as a way to humanize the experience and bring, right? What do you think about them? And also I have like a question. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but do you see this kind of approach, like using alternate history, like in learning as like in a macro view? Can you see this used in other ages, like for young people? Like, because I'm not sure with what kind of students. I think you were talking about adults, right?
Yes, these are bachelor
Or
degrees.
no?
And undergrad.
So,
But I'm sure that with children, this is kind of a natural process because children always ask, what if?
Yes.
And they're always creating these stories. I'm so glad you're back, Alfredo.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry for this disruption. Actually, you won't believe it. The problem was that my battery went off, the battery of the mouse. So it took me some time to realize. But Cynthia, as I was mentioning, your work is impressive and I love it. Let me ask you something that I have encountered in my own life as a consultant for corporations. Business people are so trained and so hard trained and directed to results that they don't have much time to think out of the box. So when you think of build another story, it's pretty hard for them to get out of the story that they were running and then do something different. So I have to show them things that actually show them that this might be very different. And I've tried to do this through arts, showing art that is not completely abstract, because that's very difficult to interpret, right? Or concrete art. But something that is figurative enough to trigger the imagination, because what is lacking actually is curiosity. You see, many large companies have disappeared because they didn't have enough curiosity to interpret what was happening. And things happened and they disappeared. But there must have been people there inside the company that had enough curiosity to analyze the story and warn the leaders, hey, listen, this is going to happen. And they didn't pay enough attention. So I don't think it's only a question of changing the story, but also of inducing people to be more curious and more imaginative. And this requires the training, which, as you were saying, children have because it's naturally embedded in them. But something happens with education over time that people become rather formatted and almost unable to think differently. And this is a problem in consulting, because consultants are brought in for a very short span of time to solve a specific problem, and then they leave. But the company continues with the same organizational structure, same history, and you may have triggered them to something, hey, why don't you look at this from this other perspective? But then you leave. So that injection that we as consultants give them, is it enough to actually provoke change? How do you feel about this?
One of the main problems is that you kind of induce the change at the beginning, but once you leave and they go back to their old ways, sometimes things are forgotten. And they don't have this mindset that change is something that you should embrace and that you should change constantly according to everything that's changing around you. I'm just going to show you the images that I showed Amanda from yesterday when we introduced soul collage, which is an art technique. This is something that the students did when they were analyzing their companies. And then they first they did the image, and then they created a story based on what they created here. But as you can see, there were a lot of insights there for businesses that they would never thought about. For instance, this one, right?
Yeah.
And as you said, introducing these things, this was not introducing a piece of art that was already made, but have them actually work on the piece of art so that they get more involved in the process, and then they had to give an interpretation to whatever they did and introduce it as part of the change. So the more involved the people get, the more hands-on approach they have on whatever is happening during the consulting process, the more the change is going to stick, because it has this relation to memorable things. And when you relate it also to business archaeology, that you relate things to specific objects or places or people that were there in a moment in time, and that you can even bring that piece of something and put it as a memento somewhere, that also better connects to this idea of, okay, that was something that we had to change, or something that needed something to be done towards that, but I have something that's remembering this constantly. So I think that those things might help.
Well, I don't want to give up, but it's pretty hard to instill that change. Huh? I don't know if I've become too old and too disheartened. But to change people's minds, you require an enormous amount of sustained effort, and not the type of effort that we can deliver as consultants. So I agree with Amanda that, you know, the age must have something to do with it. And could we trigger the sensitivity amongst older people, like undergraduates or executives, of how they used to be, how they used to ask questions that they don't ask anymore? Because you see, corporations are geared to conformity. You have a machine that does something, you have to make that machine work to get those products, you have to get the inputs in, and you have to get the products out and distribute them. All that is very important. Otherwise, there's no company, no firm, no production. But asking the odd questions of why is it that like this is something that I fear that is not being done enough. And it might work with some people, but with very few. And so asking perhaps teachers of school children, how is it that you deal with curiosity? Is something that we should be working on. I remember that I was very worried about how I used to love the looks of children until they were about 10. But shortly after that, they had lost the life in their eyes. And I've never been able to understand why. They were curious, they wanted to absorb everything, and then they wanted to talk to you, and they wanted to listen. But at some time, shortly in pre-adolescence, they seem to lose interest. And this is something which is worrisome. And if we could actually get those executives to remember how they used to be, how much more interesting they used to be, then perhaps we would trigger back into them the same attitude of questioning, of loving to know and learn and challenge. And perhaps that would be the best way for us to exert change, reminding them how they used to be, far more interesting individuals than they are today. That might apply to myself as well.
So everyone, in fact, it's at age 4 that children start to lose interest in asking questions. So age 4, it's really, really young.
Yes.
And by age 11, they almost ask no questions at all. And in part, it has to do with how they relate to adults, because toddlers, they ask over 100 questions a day. And parents somehow say, stop it. Why this, why this, why this? Because I said so.
Yes.
You caught the interest of children in knowing. They really will end up saying, okay, if that's the reason because you said so, I'm not interested anymore.
Yes, I'm concerned.
And this is something that if we think about like classroom situations, especially with teenagers, I think that if we could try to restore this alternate history method or the idea of alternate history like especially like in high school students, they would have like a total different experience with the process, like because like Alfred was saying, like it seems like that we forgot questions about that curiosity. Like it told us like it's a process that we know that happens. But it seems to me like maybe thinking as a teacher that if we could do that like with especially teenagers before like graduate students, they become like graduate students, we could have like a different scenario in the learning process in general. I feel that way, you know.
And
No, I think
you
you're
know,
right, Amanda. I think you're right. But it's a tough world, you know, people have to find employment. And business is pretty standard, right? And non-creative. So all these guys come up with interesting questions about, oh, shut up and get on with work, right? Yes, I think that we not only we should work on the people themselves to instill curiosity and an attitude of learning, but also on the people that recruit these people to work. I mean, recruiting is probably one of the most interesting areas of corporations, but I don't think they have enough power. And they might not even know how to do it properly. They've just been transformed in that job of there is this job to be done, which is the person that is most likely to fit in, and it's just a puzzle. Recruiting has been turned into a puzzle. Solve that puzzle and get on with it, right? Which also means that people can't change their careers because they may have entered the company through one slot, but they would like now to do something different, but nobody helps them to find a different job because you've never done it before, right? And if they've never done it before, they probably are hopeless and useless for what I need. And they can't change their careers, and that's horrible. No, you enter into a corporation in finance, you have to be finance all your life, and you enter as an engineer to deal with supply chain, and this is what you're expected to do the rest of your life. It's a killer, right? So I think that we can help, yes, but we have to change people, and people, you change them since very young, and if you can't change them since now, at least you can remind them of how they used to be. Far more interesting people than they are today.
yes, and I believe that what if is such a powerful question.
I think it is, yes, I think it is. I think it is. Yes, it's one of those interesting questions, right? What if this had been different? Just consider the possibility that the world need not be always the same. I mean, it's obvious to us, right? But not to the majority of the people that work in corporations. They need to sell. Sell what? We make, right? What we make. What else? I mean, if you don't buy what I make, you know, somebody else is going to sell that product instead of us, right? So don't waste my time. It's terrible.
And I have a what if question for you, Alfredo, because I thought that your presentation was so interesting. And from the perspective of consulting, what if bad leaders in companies had to do with these solar cycles and sunspots?
Sorry, what if this?
What if bad leaders in companies are bad leaders because of the solar cycles and sunspots? So,
well, we are trying to look into that, but we need funding. Because what we have done now is the statistics of turnover of CEOs. You know, when a company doesn't sell much, the board doesn't like it, and eventually they fire the CEO. And it may not have been the CEO's fault because of what I was mentioning before. Even Jevons, you know, in the late 19th century was suggesting that perhaps business cycles were triggered by weather events. Right now, if the business cycle as a guy that I'm quoting in my article with my colleagues, he's now working for the International Monetary Fund, the senior economist there, and he's suggesting that perhaps business cycles have to do with geomagnetic disturbances. So if a CEO cannot sell enough, should he be fired? Like Gina Grant was fired from Harvard and Yale because she had killed her mother 15 years earlier. It doesn't make sense, right? So it is possible that geomagnetic disturbances are far more important than we have recognized at present. But in order to convince people, we have to use the tools that people accept, which is statistics. And you need data. We have the data on geomagnetic disturbances because it's collected for productivity purposes, because if a disturbance is too great, it might affect the GPS system or it might affect the electricity distribution. So we have to know when geomagnetic disturbances are going to happen. But they have not studied what happens to people when you have those geomagnetic disturbances. And we know that it happens to birds, migrating birds. We know that it happens to whales because they get ditched on the sand, but it must also affect people. And we need to figure out, we can't actually say, oh, so-and-so is sad, or so-and-so is joyful, or so-and-so is nutty because of geomagnetic disturbances. No, we need something more evident, like a corpse. Right? That guy was alive and now he's lying flat, right? So he's dead. At what time did he die, right? Oh, he died, and who pulled the trigger? Those things are important, but perhaps that trigger was pulled not by the person that actually excited, but because of the geomagnetic disturbances that excited this person who was more sensitive to that than other people around him or her. Right? And if if the doctors can find the pathway to that aggressivity, then perhaps the pharma industry one day might find a pill. Right? Now, if you take that pill, that you will become less sensitive to geomagnetic disturbances. You can't do away with the sun, right? But at least you can help people.
And another what-if question might be, what if this also applies to politicians and specific terms? Because if we look at Latin America right now and a lot of what's happening in our countries, you see that there's something that's bigger than ourselves, right? In terms of bad leaders.
I agree with you. It's puzzling. I've lived for long enough to understand that we have gone through periods of creativity and leftist people whom I like. And now we are falling backwards into racist people and order and all these things, which are quite boring. So there seems to be a pendulum in the way that people are selected for political power. And at this moment, unfortunately, it's, whether it's in Argentina or the US or Mexico or Venezuela or even in Mexico, you have a penchant for people being authoritarian. Right? And this is nasty. And we're probably going to fall through a period that might last long, because these cycles last 11 years, as I was saying. Geomagnetic disturbances last for a long time. And it might happen that, creativity will suffer. The creative people won't find jobs. They will lose power. They will be ushered away from political office. And we are going to have to lie flat for 10 years. I hope not.
Alfredo, is that like a worry for you that in the future people could use the solar activity, use this theory as an excuse to crimes in general?
It is possible, Amanda, if you're not responsible for what you do because something happened out in the sun. Then could everything be excused? It is something that is worrying, yes. For 500 years, we've believed that people are responsible for their actions. and rightly so. To some extent they are. But now we're getting to this stage in which perhaps they're not as responsible as we thought. And then, therefore, can they do anything and then get away with it? Yes, Amanda, this is it is a matter of concern.
It is really interesting, Alfredo. One of my notes were related to the fact that you use like homicides, but you already answered because of the corpse and the numbers and the methodology, how easier it was like to work on this. It's interesting because I've seen like studies before relating solar activities with cardiovascular problems and also some kind of mental problems. I saw something about this, I guess in Brazil, and but it's like you said, it's hard like to measure, right? So I think that's maybe like you said, one of the things you should consider, like how would you continue to study, how would you continue to go through it, through this topic, if you don't have like data, like something to measure, right?
Yes. Yes.
Do you know, like, do you have plans like to continue to work with this? Would you
Yes,
stay with
yes, we will continue
homicide?
to work. We will continue to work, but with our fingertips, right? I mean, I've got beautiful colleagues that I love, and we work together for no money, right? All this that we have published and worked is something because we think is important. So, for example, we know that Americans kill each other at an astounding rate, right? The crime rate, the homicide rate in the US is higher than in most civilized countries. And the interesting thing is that it's much higher, 3 to 4 times higher than in Canada, which is just across the border. And what is it? Of course, it's drugs. Of course, it's weapons and whatever. But the interesting thing is that we have shown that once you take away the differences in culture, the homicide rates in the US and Canada vary at the same time. There's more killing in the US, there's more killing in Canada. And when it drops in Canada, it drops in the US as well, right? So there must be something that is affecting both homicide rates in these countries, which are so close to each other that you would imagine that either they were the same or they would be different for historical reasons, right? And the history has separated them. And this is why the Canadians don't kill each other as frequently as the Americans do, right? But the fact that both go up and down at the same time suggests that the traditional approach of looking into criminology, of figuring out the intention, the weapon, the circumstances, is not enough, right? But all these criminologists, they have taken over the journals of criminology. And if you come up with an idea that is a bit too different, they will look at you, hey, this guy's probably nuts. Look at the hat he's wearing. Huh? Yeah, that's the world we live in, Amanda, right? I mean, you are wearing this thing on your nose, right? Does that make you different? It probably does. But does this make you something that we should not listen to? Of course not. Right? But the formal world behaves in a different way. And unfortunately, those are the guys that employ the people, and people need employment in order to pay rent and food and education for their children. So we end up subjected to people that we would rather not work for. This is strange.
Strange, but most interesting.
Yes. I remember that I once went to a conference of board of directors. It's not even the CEO. The board of directors represent the shareholders. They are the shareholders, right? So there were these guys, all in their shirts and with their ties, and they all looked like, they couldn't even breathe, right? I mean, but there they were. And then they brought into the picture a guy who was an investor. He owned the money. And then one of these naive people asked him, how do you control the CEOs? And the guy looked at the rest and said, like, are you silly? Are you stupid? I mean, I control them with a checkbook. It's awful, right? But look at what happened just this week with OpenAI, the artificial intelligence company. I mean, artificial intelligence is probably or will be as important as the steam engine once was. But it's in the hand of people that are so immature that they fight like if they were in the playground, right? And they dismissed one guy, so he went to Microsoft, and then Microsoft almost got the 700 of them employed because and so now the people that had fired him are probably going to be fired themselves, and the guy gets reinstated. And you say, hey, listen, I mean, something which is so important is being handled in such an immature way that in whose hands are we? Right? This is what's really worrying. I mean, forget about the worrying of artificial intelligence. I mean, just worry about who's controlling it. Because this should never have happened. And there's nothing good about it. So we study business, we study leadership, we consult for companies. But then how do you explain this? I mean, it reminds me when I was a child at school, and then the guy that owned the football would take the football home, and the game stopped because he ran away with the football. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's life, huh? And this is what we should be concerned about, right? It's so. What happened at OpenAI a week ago is something that should be a matter of enormous concern. Not that the war in Ukraine is not that the horrible things that are happening in Gaza are not important, but we can't do much about it as consultants in business. But when something happens in this, and you have Microsoft investing $10 billion into a business that is run by children, you have to worry. You have to worry. And it's not a question of asking what if, no.
Yeah.
No, it's how is it? What world is this that you can come up with a bright idea and manage it so poorly? I mean, well, of course there is a hearsay. No, I didn't like so because he was no. I mean, obviously you're going to explain why you did it, but they came out looking like fools, and they are dealing with what is called intelligence. But they didn't seem to show any emotional intelligence at all. So
because it's artificial.
Sorry?
Because it's artificial.
Oh, yes, but it's a problem, right? I mean, if these guys are meant to provide the guardrails that will enable people to feel secure with this technology, I don't. I mean, if this technology is in those hands, I'm not safe. Nobody is. My wife is calling me. I don't know how much longer do we have, Amanda.
I was checking here. There is no questions like from the live
audience. Okay.
The audience. So I don't know if is there anything else that would like to share?
We had all the fun ourselves, huh?
Yeah, we did. It's on YouTube, so we can share it later. So I guess again, I would like to thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing this with us today. And for me, it was like really nice to be here. And I don't know if you want to share anything else, if you want to say something.
No, as always, it was a
If you
pleasure.
don't, I think we
Very
can.
much.
Thank
No,
you,
thank you.
Alfredo. Thank you very much, Cynthia. And
It
thank
was
you,
really
Manuel.
nice.
You were here. So I think we can end the section, and remember that the link will be like on YouTube if we want to share with other people.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, Alfredo.
Bye-bye,
Bye
Cynthia.
bye. See you.
And Amanda, give me a call because
I will.
Okay.
Alfredo, we'll talk.
Enjoy. Take care and have fun.
See you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It was really nice.
Thank you.
Bye.